Dusk was settling over the outskirts of Missoula, Montana. The December air was so cold that every breath turned instantly to white mist. Inside an old auction barn, tucked away at the edge of the industrial district, fluorescent lights flickered against the concrete ceiling, casting a pale, sterile glow that felt more like an abandoned hospital than a place of commerce. The air hung thick with the scent of sweat, animal fur, and damp, moldy wood. Murmurs and laughter mixed with the sharp clatter of gavels and hoarse auction calls. Logan Hale entered through the side door, the soft tap of his prosthetic leg echoing across the cement floor, a rhythm of solitude and steel. He wore a faded military green jacket, a wool beanie pulled low, his face weathered, his eyes shadowed by a grief too deep for words. The kind of sorrow carried by those who have survived things the world will never understand. He hadn't planned on buying anything today, but a tiny ad in the classifieds had kept him awake for 3 straight nights. Military dog untrainable final auction before termination. The room was more crowded than he expected. Wealthy men in trench coats with polished leather shoes flicked their Rolexes as they waited. A few women stood beside them, draped in fur, clutching designer purses, scanning the space as if choosing a new centerpiece for their weekend estates. Then he saw it. In the far corner of the concrete floor, beneath a dim, buzzing bulb, lay a German shepherd curled into itself. Not resting collapsed. Its coat, once likely sable, was now dull and matted, streaked with old scars and patches of missing fur. One of its hind legs was clearly broken, bent unnaturally. No one had bothered to splint it. The dog didn't whimper. It didn't howl. It simply stared into the void. One eye clouded over with damage. But the other? The other eye was fixed on Logan. And in that instant the world fell silent. No more gavel strikes, no murmurs, just a gaze, wounded, hollowed out, but alive. A soul still tethered to this world by the thinnest of threads. The auctioneer struck the gavel again. Lot number 47, male German shepherd, formerly trained, no longer fit for duty, difficult to handle, starting at $50. Who wants to try their luck? Laughter erupted from the front rows. Him! That thing's finished. Wouldn't take him if he was free. Another man chuckled, nudging his friend. Let the kids play war games with it. Logan's jaw tightened, not in anger or revulsion. He saw the way they looked at the dog like a broken toy. None of them noticed the eye. None of them realized he was still in there. Logan stepped forward. His voice cut through the noise. Not loud, but sharp like a blade sliding through paper. I'll take him. The room froze. The auctioneer blinked, then beamed with relief. Great. 200 cash, right now. No paperwork needed. Just sign here and accept full liability. Logan didn't even read the form. He signed. A man handed him a worn leather leash. Careful. He's nasty. Just because he can't walk right doesn't mean he can't bite. Nearly took a guy's hand off once. Logan said nothing. He simply approached slowly, measured. The dog didn't move, but his gaze followed every step. When Logan crouched not too close, not too far, he spoke softly. Asher, you're not broken. I see you. I know you're still in there. For the first time, the dog stirred. Not to flee, but to listen. Logan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a piece of dried sausage, and set it down a meter away. Asher didn't move. But his eyes, they softened. Slowly. Almost as if he understood. A few people scoffed from the back. Idiot, wasting money on a cripple. Logan stood, eyes steady, unaffected. He didn't need to explain. He only murmured, mostly to himself. I chose him. Because he used to be a hero. And he still is someone. He held the leash. Didn't tug, just wait. Asher didn't move. But then, as if a miracle needed no permission, he braced his front legs and rose, staggering on the three that still obeyed him. His broken hind leg dragged behind, useless. It hurt, but he stepped, one step, then another. Logan didn't look back. He walked toward the door, and behind him came the faint sound of claws scraping gently against concrete. Dragging, steady, determined. Their shadows merged into the amber of dusk, and the door closed softly behind them like the curtain falling on an old chapter, and opening into another, entirely new, where two fractured souls found each other. Above them, a flock of crows swept across the sky, their hoarse calls like the drawn-out sigh of a season ending. The wind chased dry leaves along the edge of the lot. Logan stopped beside his old truck, opened the door, and waited for Asher. No command needed. The dog looked up at him once more, eyes still tired but no longer lost. He climbed into the vehicle, quietly, as if he understood this was the only choice that had ever truly been his. Logan shut the door gently, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the ignition. The truck rolled out of the auction yard, tires crunching over gravel and dust, leaving behind the wealthy men scoffing and shaking their heads. None of them looked back. They didn't know what just drove away wasn't a broken thing. It was the rare survival of a soul once forged in fire. And Logan, a soldier bearing scars not just on his body, but in his memory, had found a soul just as shattered. A reflection of his own pain, so close it hurt to see. A northern wind swept across the snow-dusted fields, scattering a few old newspaper pages along the roadside. Among them was the tiny ad, now flapping meaninglessly. Untrainable, no longer of value. But Logan knew better, and Asher, with his broken leg, his scars, and a world that had left him behind, was still walking, still alive. And from that moment on, he would never have to walk alone. The truck rolled down the gray plain, slipping into the hush of twilight. Crosswinds lashed the roadside, stirring up dust and frost into swirling eddies along the dying grass. Inside the cabin, Logan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently on the steering knob. His eyes glanced at the rearview mirror from time to time, where Asher lay stretched on the blanket-draped back seat, head on his paws, eyes never straying far from Logan. No words were spoken. Man and dog shared the silence like it was the only language left that didn't hurt. No promises, no pity, just presence. The kind quiet enough not to wound, and strong enough not to be ignored. The farm emerged beyond a curve in the hill, a modest wooden house standing lonely among barren fields, wrapped in a sagging fence, beside an empty grain barn and a horse stable whose roof had caved in halfway. Logan parked by the porch, stepped out, opened the back door, and stood aside. "Asher," he said softly. The dog didn't move. Not in refusal, but in thought. "Come down. No rush." Asher lifted his head, eyes blinking slowly. His broken leg made each movement labored, but he tried. Logan didn't help not out of coldness, but because he understood what Asher needed wasn't mercy. It was a chance to walk on his own. The dog landed on the dirt, exhaled hard, stood still for a few seconds, then began limping across the leaf-strewn yard. Logan led him to the old grain barn. One corner had been cleaned and prepared straw bedding, a frayed rug, and a clean bowl of water. Asher paused at the threshold, hesitant. Logan didn't look back. He simply said, "That spot's okay for tonight. Stay or not your call." Then he walked away, leaving the door ajar. That first night, Asher lay outside the barn. Logan sat in the cabin beside the wood stove, a cold cup of coffee in hand. Every so often he cracked the door open. Asher was still there like a statue, resting his head on his paws, eyes open. Logan spoke into the night, just loud enough for the wind to carry it. I was like that once too. Slept out on the grass for nights after they discharged me. Couldn't feel the cold. Just heard it. By morning, the food bowl remained untouched. A little water was gone. Logan said nothing. He quietly refilled the bowl and left a few pieces of dried sausage before heading out to tend the fields. When he returned, nothing had changed. The food was still there. He frowned, but let it go. That evening, the cold came fast. Logan stepped onto the porch with an extra blanket, intending to lay it near Asher. As he bent down, the dog suddenly shot up, growling, eyes wide with panic. He backed away, teeth bared. Logan froze, not angry, just aching inside, like something invisible had squeezed his heart. I wasn't gonna hit you, he said gently. Just bringing you a blanket. He still stood there, hunched into himself, bracing as if something worse was coming. It wasn't thought of. It was instinct. Wounded instinct. Logan sighed, placed the blanket down gently, and turned away. A flicker of frustration stirred in him, not because of the growl, but because of the helplessness. He had brought the dog home, offered shelter, food, and a chance. Yet Asher still didn't trust him, still trembled. Damn it, he muttered. I don't have time to baby you like a child. But later, when the lights were out and silence filled the house, Logan glanced through the window. Asher had pulled the blanket toward himself, and for the first time, he slept. Not deeply, but peacefully, at least in body. On the third day, half the food was gone. Logan showed no reaction, but for the first time, he turned on the old radio while working in the yard. Slow, soulful blues drifted through the window, heavy with longing. Asher didn't run. He lay by the sunlit wall, blinking slowly. Now and then, his ears twitched to the sound of the harmonica. Logan noticed, said nothing, but inside, something quietly warmed. That afternoon, while fixing the barn door, the sudden clatter of a dropped tool startled Asher. He recoiled sharply, stumbling, his eyes darting in alarm. Logan saw it. He knelt down, set the screwdriver aside, and said softly, "No one's going to hit you here. We're not there anymore." Asher didn't respond at once, but when Logan walked away, the dog crept over to the fallen tool, sniffed it, and lay back down in the same spot. A small moment, but for the broken. Every tiny act is a victory. On the fourth night, Asher moved closer to the door. Logan cracked it open, reading by the firelight. He didn't look directly at the dog, just let the warm glow spill into the dark. After a while, Asher stepped inside. Very slowly, without a sound. He settled about 10 feet away from Logan. Logan glanced over and gave a small nod. No words, but the corner of his mouth curved ever so slightly. He spoke, almost to himself. I used to think I was the only thing left after the war, but maybe so were you. Asher blinked. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the tone. No sharpness, no distance. The next morning, Logan rose earlier than usual. He stepped out quietly and saw Asher lying just below the porch. When he opened the door, the dog lifted his head. His ears drooped slightly, but his eyes no longer looked away. Logan smiled softer than any morning before. "Good morning, soldier." And Asher wagged his tail, just once. Gently, but enough to soften something rigid deep inside Logan Hale. In the days that followed, Logan began to notice the small signs. Asher breathed more evenly in his sleep, flinched less at sudden sounds. Sometimes he wandered the yard on his own, not far, but far enough to show curiosity about this new world. One afternoon, as Logan sat eating a sandwich on the porch, Asher came over. He didn't beg. He simply sat beside him. Logan glanced sideways, quietly split the sandwich in half. Asher took his portion with a hesitant, cautious motion, but without retreating. And one evening after that, when the wind rose and distant thunder grumbled across the hills, Asher didn't bolt. He pressed himself into the corner by the door, eyes wide but not panicked. Logan brought the blanket, sat down beside him. He didn't touch the dog. He just stayed. "I'm here," he said, voice soft as the night breeze. Asher lowered his ears, closed his eyes, and in that quiet moment between two breaths, fear gave way to something new. Peace. At last they had begun, a journey without words, but full of understanding. No need to rush, no pressure, just one step at a time together. In the days after Asher's first tail wag, nothing changed dramatically, but things changed still. Slowly, like dew collecting on the tips of grass. Soundless, but deep. Logan woke earlier, not from duty, but from something that felt like anticipation. Asher was usually already awake, seated on the porch, head tilted, eyes cast toward the distant mountains waiting for the first streaks of morning orange to rise. They sat side by side, silently sharing a sliver of ham or a crumb of bread, sometimes just exchanging a nod as a greeting. Asher was eating regularly now. No skipped meals, no flinching when Logan came close. One afternoon, while Logan hammered nails into the fence, Asher approached. He didn't bark, just sat behind him still as a shadow. But it was a stillness that could be trusted. And when Logan reached a hand behind without turning, his fingers touched the thick fur on Asher's neck. The dog didn't flinch. He bowed his head slightly, brushing his forehead against the crook of Logan's elbow. It was the first touch. Logan didn't speak, but his hand gripped the hammer tighter, as if something had trembled inside him, something that couldn't be spoken out loud. One warm noon, Logan brewed a pot of coffee and sat on the porch steps. Asher lay in the shade nearby, eyes half closed. When Logan began to read aloud a few lines from an old book, a habit he'd carried from his military days, Asher's ears perked slightly. He didn't understand, of course, but the sound of Logan's voice seemed to steady him. Logan noticed. So he kept reading, not for himself, but for the shaggy listener stretched out in the quiet. That night, Asher fell asleep on the rug in front of the wood stove, something he'd never done before. When Logan woke at midnight, the fire still glowing red, he saw that quiet shape breathing calmly in the warmth. And for the first time, the house didn't feel empty anymore. One day, Logan decided it was time to check Asher's leg. He brought out antiseptic, gauze, and a generous dose of patience. In the past, every time Ava the vet got close, Asher would lash out in fear. But this time, Logan called no one. He just sat beside the dog, setting the medicine bag down with the flap open, making sure Asher could see everything. No rush, no pressure. Just there. Asher looked at him, then at the bag. He didn't back away. He didn't step forward. But when Logan gently touched the injured leg, Asher let out one long breath. No growl, no flinch. Logan worked slowly, cleaned, wrapped, rinsed, and Asher stayed still the entire time, as if to say, "I trust you now." When it was done, Logan sat back against the barn wall. Asher laid his head on Logan's leg. Not out of exhaustion, but out of choice. That was the first time Logan cried. No sound, just a single tear tracing the weathered lines of his face. "I didn't rescue you, kid," he murmured, voice thick with something unspoken. "I'm trying to rescue myself." In the afternoons that followed, Asher began exploring the yard. At first just a few paces from the porch. then farther to the back garden, where wild grasses tangled themselves among stone and bark. Logan watched him move, head low, tail swaying slightly, not from joy, but from the slow return of belonging. They formed a new ritual every evening. Logan brewed tea, sat on the wooden chair, and Asher would lie beside him, head resting gently on Logan's foot. One night, the wind kicked up hard. Logan shielded his eyes, and Asher sprang to his feet, standing guard in front of him, instinct of a trained warrior. Logan chuckled softly. "There's nothing to protect here, little one." But deep down, he knew he had just been protected. One Sunday morning, Logan decided to try something new. Take Asher for a walk on a leash. He didn't tighten it, just held it loose and walked. Asher followed beside him, no pulling, no hesitation. Sometimes he'd glance up at Logan, as if asking, "Is it okay to go this far?" And each time, Logan replied with a quiet nod. When they reached the edge of a small lake beyond the woods, Asher dipped his head to drink while Logan sat on a rock and looked up at the sky. It was one of those moments so still, so whole, that all old wounds seemed to dissolve into the breeze. "How far have we come, huh?" Logan said, not expecting an answer. But Asher looked back, gave his knee a soft lick, then lay down beside his feet. It was the most beautiful answer Logan had ever received. One rainy evening, Logan lit the stove and made stew. This time he set a bowl down for Asher, not outside on the porch like always, but inside the kitchen. Asher hesitated for a moment, then stepped in without fear. He sat and ate, while Logan leaned on the counter, watching him. And in that brief moment, the cabin was no longer just a stopover, it had become a home. Rain tapped gently at the windows. Wind howled faintly in the trees. But inside, there was only the soft slurping of soup and the occasional crackle of firewood. Logan said, "You know, someone once told me only brave souls survive what they never deserved. I think you're one of them." Asher, of course, didn't answer, but he shifted closer and curled up right at Logan's feet. Not as a reflex of safety, but an act of pure trust. Before bed, Logan glanced down at where Asher lay. He pulled out a blanket and tossed it gently toward the dog. Asher caught the edge in his teeth and tugged it closer. Logan laughed. "Good boy, learning to ask for what you need, huh?" Asher wagged his tail once, then curled into sleep. In the peaceful hush of the wooden cabin, Logan whispered to no one but the quiet itself. "When I look into Asher's eyes, I realize this whole world can be held inside a gaze like that. And if a dog is brave enough to lay down beside you, then your only job is to stay and wait for the first wag." That night's rain stretched all the way into morning, laying a fine mist over the wooden rooftop. When Logan stepped onto the porch with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, Asher was already there as always, quietly watching the rain-soaked forest beyond. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They shared the morning the way they always had, with a peaceful silence that nothing else could replace. But something felt different today. An old pickup rolled to a stop just outside the wooden fence. Ava Reynolds, the local veterinarian and a longtime friend of Logan, stepped out, holding a large brown envelope. Her face was pale, and her eyes carried a weight she hadn't yet put into words. "Something wrong?" Logan asked as she climbed the steps. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze lingered on Asher, the four-legged companion sitting by Logan's side, his head tilted slightly, as if sensing the shift in the air. Then she extended the envelope. "Military file," she said quietly. "I pulled some strings in the system. They sent a temporary print out overnight." Logan took it and sat down on the porch steps. Asher remained beside him, unmoving. He opened the envelope. The first page was a training record. And there it was, a bold name that made Logan's heart freeze for a moment. Rex, MWD number 72614. He repeated the name silently, like calling out to a memory he almost recognized but couldn't quite grasp. Below it, lines of notes scrolled down the page. Specialized training, K9 Task Force, deployed, Kandahar, Helmand, Sangin. Multiple recommendations for commendation. Unexpected behavioral response after third mission. Status, uncontrollable. Rex, Logan whispered. Asher looked up at the sound. That name as if it had brushed against something buried deep in him. His eyes stayed locked on Logan's. Ava sat down beside them, speaking gently. This is the list of missions he participated in. I looked closely. There are some anomalies. Logan flipped to the next page. A mission report marked with a red stamp. One faded line caught his eye, enough to make his fingers tighten around the paper. Last deployment Alpha Unit, Kandahar Outskirts, Joint Operation, Lieutenant Michael Baker's team. Michael Baker, a close friend, a fellow soldier who had died during a mission wrapped in mystery. Logan remembered the day he received the news, the confusion, the emptiness, every report vague, every answer incomplete. And now, in front of him, lay a piece of the puzzle long kept in the dark by a dog who had been there, side by side with the team. He looked at Asher. Or rather, Rex. Asher didn't understand everything, but the look in his eyes, it was as if he was saying, I remember, at least part of it. Logan paused at the final page for a handwritten report. The scrawl was rough, rushed but firm. Someone had scribbled, Dog displayed insubordinate behavior after losing direct handler, refused orders, ran into the blast zone to search for wounded. Recommendation, removal from active unit. Not a single line about loyalty, not a word about how he'd returned to a hellscape to save someone. Ava clenched her hands. He wasn't removed because he failed. He was removed because he did what was right. No one spoke for a while. Only the steady patter of rain dripping from the eaves to the damp earth. Logan sat there, one hand resting on Asher's head, eyes fixed on the horizon. After a long silence, he said softly, He was a soldier, and he didn't give up even when they gave up on him. Asher nestled his head into Logan's lap, breathing slow and even, a silent agreement, unspoken but deeply understood. Logan looked up at Ava. I need to know who ordered his removal. Who wrote those cold, dismissive words? Ava nodded. I'll dig deeper. Might have to reach out to someone in the military. But if we can find official documentation, he could be reinstated. Logan gripped the file in his hands. Not just reinstated. He deserves recognition as a real soldier, not a deleted number in someone's system. Asher lifted his head once more, looking at Logan. And in those eyes, something glimmered. Like a quiet flame rekindling beneath the ashes. That night, Logan spread the documents across the wooden table, reading each line slowly. Asher lay at his feet, his head resting on Logan's worn slippers, unmoving. Each time Logan turned a page, Asher blinked as if listening to a story that somehow belonged to him. Rex, Logan whispered. From now on, that name won't be hidden anymore. Asher didn't react dramatically, but his tail wagged just once, softly. In the gentle hush of the mountain night, Logan looked down at the dog drifting toward sleep by his side, his heart heavy, yet strangely lighter. Because he knew about this journey, was only the beginning. The next morning, the path leading out to the fence was still cloaked in fog when Logan took Asher for a walk around the yard. Each step the dog took was slow but steady, head low, ears alert, eyes no longer darting from fear but searching, as if trying to remember a place he had once walked before. Logan knew then this journey wasn't just about healing. It was about reclaiming an identity stolen from a soldier. When they returned, Ava Reynolds was already inside, waiting. She had brought more documents, her expression more serious than ever. "I got more information about the man who ran Rex's training program," she said, as Logan poured coffee for both of them. "His name is Vincent Krause, rank, Major. He led a special K-9 unit at a southern facility." The name, though Logan had never met the man, sent a chill down his spine. Ava placed a pale yellow photo on the table. In it stood a middle-aged man with piercing eyes and a pristine uniform. But what caught Logan's attention wasn't the sharp attire. It was the void in his eyes. "He's the one who signed off on removing Rex from active duty," Ava said carefully, "and he supervised the entire retraining program we've long suspected was systematic abuse." Logan gripped his coffee cup tighter. Asher, still lying beneath him, perked up his ears. "Do we have anything more detailed?" Logan asked. Ava nodded and pulled out 3 photocopied memos from a military source. One described overextended physical testing beyond regulation limits. Another outlined 18-hour training cycles. The last detailed the use of shock tools, both electric devices and high-frequency sound emitters. "He called it breaking them down to build them back up," Ava murmured, her voice catching. "But most dogs who left his program never worked again. They were either removed or disappeared from the records altogether." Logan said nothing. He stood and stepped out onto the porch, eyes fixed on the ridgeline where sunlight now pierced through the thinning mist. Asher followed him, walking close like a trusted shadow. Logan bent down, placing his hand on the dog's back. "We'll find them," he whispered. "The ones who did this to you and others like you." That afternoon, Logan began combing through old files he'd kept from his service days. He recalled hearing of a southern facility where many K-9s were reassigned after showing psychological distress post-mission. He sent a message to a former officer who once served as a senior trainer. That night, Logan's phone rang. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the other end. "I know Krause. Met him once. If you're getting involved in this, be careful." Logan sat upright. "He handled a K-9 named Rex. Do you know the case?" A few seconds of silence. "Yeah. I remember that dog. Saved a soldier's life during a blast in Kandahar, but later got transferred out for disobedience. I never bought that. Never did." "Do you know where Krause is now?" Logan asked directly. "He's not listed publicly, but I heard he moved into private contracting. Runs a tactical training center for security firms now. Whatever he's doing, it's beyond oversight." Logan nodded, even though the man couldn't see him. "Thank you." "Be careful," the voice said again. "If you plan to dig this up, Krause isn't the only one involved." Logan ended the call, stood up, and walked to the backyard. The night air was crisp, sweeping across the treetops like a silent tide. Asher had been wandering nearby, but when he saw Logan, he immediately returned to his side, walking like a true comrade, step for step, heart for heart. "It looks like we've got a long road ahead of us, old friend," Logan murmured, his hand gently stroking Asher's head. The dog looked up at him, and something flickered in those eyes, as if a message had been received. Logan leaned down, forehead resting against the dog's. "You're no longer an abandoned dog. You're a witness, a warrior, and the reason I keep moving forward." Asher exhaled softly, resting his head against Logan's chest. Logan wrapped one arm around him. No more words were needed. On the wooden table inside, the files about Vincent Krause remained open. Logan knew that to restore justice for Asher, he would have to face something much larger than one man. He would be going up against a system that had allowed ghosts like Krause to thrive, and he was ready. By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving behind a sky smeared in ash gray and soil soaked through. Fog still clung to the treetops, casting the pine forest in a sleepy haze, as if the entire land had just exhaled after a long, silent night. Logan sat on the porch steps, warm coffee in hand, watching Asher curled beneath the awning, head on a worn blanket. The dog was fast asleep, not curled in fear like before, but stretched out, relaxed. His breathing was even. His body is finally at ease. A true, deep sleep. For the first time since bringing Asher home, Logan didn't wake up with worry in his chest. He didn't check for paw prints, didn't scan the ground for signs of escape. This morning, at least, all was calm. He stepped down onto the yard, did a few stretches out of his old military routine. When he returned, Asher had already lifted his head. His ears drooped slightly, not in fear, just from sleepiness. Logan chuckled. "Good morning, little warrior. You did good yesterday." Asher stretched, shook the rain from his fur, then followed Logan inside, no command, no coaxing. He came because he wanted to. Logan filled the food bowl and set it in the usual corner. Asher ate slowly, bite by bite, but this time, without glancing around, without growling. Logan noticed it immediately. This dog had come a long way from the first night, when he'd laid outside with wide eyes and a racing heart. After breakfast, Logan decided to try something new, a walk around the farm. No leash, no commands, just two companions. "You want to go, Asher?" The dog tilted his head, then stepped beside him, walking shoulder to shoulder. They moved past the backfield, along the weathered fence, and crossed the shallow ditch where spring rains would soon rise. Asher paused, often sniffing, listening but always returned with a soft call. The only leash between them now was trust. When they reached the old hill, the same one Asher had once fled from Logan stopped. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp leaves and early grass. Asher halted beside him. He looked around, then sat down. Logan didn't blink. That small gesture was so ordinary. It was the clearest sign yet that Asher had returned, not just in body, but in spirit. "You okay?" Asher looked up, and for the first time, Logan saw no trace of fear in those eyes. No shadows, only readiness. That afternoon, Ava came by to check in. As she stepped out of her truck, Asher met her halfway. No barking, no hesitation. He walked slowly, sniffed her sleeve, then sat down and waited. Ava's eyes widened. Logan simply shrugged with a grin. He had a long night, and this morning, a new beginning. During the exam, Asher didn't growl, didn't pull away. He flinched a little when Ava touched the old injury on his leg but didn't run. He stayed, until Ava withdrew her hands and gave Logan a nod. "Good," she said. "Really good. Not just physically. He's healing inside." Logan stood still, watching his friend wag his tail gently at Ava. Something heavy in his chest eased, even as something else settled deeper. He knew now. Not all wounds need medicine. Some only need time, and someone willing to stay through the silence. That evening, Logan tidied the cabin. He pulled out a new rug, one he'd once set aside for the living room, and laid it by the fireplace. Asher didn't need to be called. He found his way there on his own, curled into the rug like it had been his spot all along. Logan sat down beside him, hand brushing gently over the dog's head. "Tomorrow we'll try going farther," Logan whispered, his hand still resting on Asher's back. "Out to the forest edge, maybe even the western hill. But only if you want to." Asher closed his eyes gently and let out a soft breath. The wind stirred again outside the porch, but this time no one flinched. In that little wooden cabin, a dog once tormented by the past had finally found rest. And beside him, a former soldier who had once lost all sense of direction had rediscovered his reason to keep walking forward. Some resurrections need no applause, no spotlight, just a quiet place to lay down, a look that meets yours, and the softest wag of a tail when the heart is finally still enough to wait. The Montana sky was unusually dark from the moment morning broke. Gray clouds drifted low across the hills, and wind howled through the old pines as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. Logan stepped onto the porch, hot coffee in hand, eyes cast upward. The air smelled of wet wind and cold earth. He didn't need the weather report to know a storm was coming. Asher sensed it even before he did. From dawn, the dog had been uneasy. He didn't lie beneath the porch like he usually did. He skipped breakfast. Instead, he paced the yard, pausing now and then, ears upright, staring into a distant, invisible space beyond the fence. "It's just a little rain, Asher," Logan said softly, though he knew the dog wasn't hearing with his ears. The fear wasn't in the wind. It was in the memory. The first clap of thunder rolled through low and long. Asher jolted. Logan saw it in his entire body, suddenly rigid, his eyes wide and filled with terror, and without warning, Asher bolted. He ran across the yard and toward the edge of the forest. "Asher!" Logan yelled. The coffee slipped from his hand and shattered on the porch. He ran after him, no hesitation. Asher wasn't running from Logan. He was running from memory. The thunder wasn't thunder. It was a bomb. It was a scream. It was dirt and blood and fire tangled into sound. In Asher's mind, the past unspooled like a reel that refused to stop. Survival kicked in. Run from the sound. Run from the place where everything was lost. Logan tore through the forest, stumbling over branches, breath ragged, voice cracking from shouting, "Asher, don't run, it's me, you're safe now!" But Asher couldn't hear him. Not yet. He wasn't escaping Logan. He was escaping a war that still lived behind his eyes. Rain came down hard. Thunder echoed again. When Logan finally caught up, he found Asher by a thicket of trees, soaked and trembling. But this time, he didn't run. Logan didn't grab it. He just stood there, arms loose at his sides, letting the rain fall. "Asher?" he said again, softly. The dog turned, slowly, and stepped toward him. They walked back through the rain together, soaked to the bone. But neither said a word. Logan didn't use the leash. Asher walked beside him, step for step, his tail swaying gently like a leaf in the autumn wind. Back at the cabin, Logan dried Asher with an old towel, then wrapped him in a blanket and laid him in front of the fire. The dog no longer trembled. He didn't flinch when lightning flashed beyond the window pane. He simply lay there, eyes half closed, his head resting on Logan's leg like a child waking from a nightmare into safety. Logan sat beside him, gently stroking his back. "You came back," he whispered, "and this time, you don't have to go anywhere." Outside, the storm still screamed through the trees, but inside the wooden cabin, a dog who once ran from fear had chosen to stay, and beside him, a soldier who had once lost his way had found a reason to remain. Dawn came slowly after the storm. The first rays of sunlight filtered through rain-drenched pines, reflecting off beads of water like 1,000 tiny crystals. The air was so still Logan could hear the soft drip of water falling from the roof into an old wooden bucket at the edge of the yard. Asher was still curled beneath the blanket, breathing steadily before the hearth. Logan didn't want to wake him. He sat by the fire, coffee steaming in his hands, eyes resting on the sleeping dog beside him. And for once, the world felt entirely at peace. Something had changed after the night before. Not just the weather, but something deeper, quieter, like a thin sheet of ice beginning to crack beneath the first gentle light of trust. When Asher woke, He lifted his head and looked at Logan. No growling, no flinching, just a soft gaze, a little sleepy, a little lazy, and completely at ease. "Good morning, little one," Logan said, bending down to rub his head. Asher blinked slowly, then stood and stretched, muscles rippling beneath his thick coat. A few droplets of rain, left over from the storm, slipped from his fur. And then he wagged his tail just once, but with all the quiet assurance of a soul finally starting to thaw, Logan opened the door, and a rush of fresh air swept in. Asher hesitated for a moment, then stepped outside first. There was no startle, no cautious footing. He wandered around the porch, sniffing at blades of grass like he was reacquainting himself with a territory that had always been his. That morning, Logan didn't say much. He placed the food bowl down as usual and stepped back. Asher walked up and ate neatly, bite by bite. When he finished, he licked his lips, then lay down near Logan. Not too close, but close enough that they could feel each other's warmth. "You know," Logan said softly, "I think maybe today we'll go for a walk. Not far. Just together. No rush." Asher didn't reply, of course. But when Logan stood and stepped off the porch, the dog rose and silently followed beside him. They walked down the damp dirt path, soft from last night's rain. Each of Asher's paw prints marked more than presence. They marked the return, a slow reclaiming of self. Logan said nothing. He didn't need to. The quiet companionship was more than enough. At the forest's edge, Asher paused. He sniffed the air, eyes drifting toward the slope that had once overwhelmed him with fear. Then, without prompting, he stepped forward. Slow, steady, as if walking straight into the shadow of his past just to show it no longer held power over him. Logan followed, staying just behind, letting Asher lead for the first time. From the top of the hill, the valley spread below them, bathed in soft greens. Logan sat beneath a tree, and Asher lay beside him, resting his head on Logan's leg. Neither said a word, but in that moment, Logan knew. The first steps had been taken out of darkness. That afternoon, Ava arrived with some ointment and food supplies. Asher trotted over the moment her truck pulled in. No barking, no hiding. He approached, sniffed her sleeve, then walked beside her like a polite child. Ava laughed. "He's really changed, Logan." "The storm did what I couldn't in a whole month," Logan replied, his eyes never leaving Asher. During the checkup, Asher flinched slightly when the ointment touched the scarred leg, but he didn't resist. He stayed still, eyes fixed on Logan. Just one look, but it said everything. "I'm okay, as long as you're here." That night, Logan tidied up the cabin. He pulled out a new rug and laid it near the fireplace, adding a soft pillow just for Asher. The dog came over, sniffed it, then curled up without hesitation, as if it had always been his. Logan turned on a small lamp and sat in the nearby armchair, book in hand but unread. His eyes drifted to the sleeping dog, chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. "Tomorrow we'll go farther," he whispered. "No rush, just the two of us." Asher didn't open his eyes, but his tail gave a slow, firm wag. Like he was saying, "Yes, let's go." And that was all Logan needed. The wind shifted in the middle of the night, bringing with it a chill that felt like it rose not from the sky, but from something stirring deep within the quiet land. Logan woke with a start, not from sound, but from a feeling, a sense that something wasn't right. Asher was still on the rug, eyes closed, but his ears stood alert. He'd grown used to this place, but he was still keen enough to sense danger before any human. Logan threw on a jacket and stepped outside. The sky was black. No stars, no moon. just the faint glow of the cabin lights casting across the dew-drenched grass. Then he caught it. The scent. Smoke. Burning wood. "Asher!" The dog was already up, close behind as Logan sprinted toward the back of the house. In the distance, flames flickered. The old barn. Logan ran to the door and flung it open. Fire had caught the dry straw. He grabbed the nearby hose, but it was too late. The flames were chewing through the roof. "Asher, stay back!" But Asher didn't stay. He growled low and darted inside before Logan could stop him. "No, Asher!" Logan's voice cracked in the air, but it was too late. Asher had vanished into the smoke. Inside, Asher moved fast, nose working, eyes sharp. A faint sound came from the back, a high-pitched, panicked whimper. Puppies. Logan hadn't known anyone had brought animals to the barn, but now only Asher could reach them. He maneuvered past fallen beams and crooked metal, his steps sure. Then he saw them, 2 tiny bodies trembling beneath a wooden table. Asher lowered himself, wagging his tail gently to calm them, then nudged them forward. The fire had spread to the entrance. Asher glanced around, then turned toward the back exit. Logan circled the building and reached the far side just as the rear door gave way. The 2 puppies bolted out first, followed closely by Asher. His fur was singed, his nose blackened with soot, but his eyes were clear and alert. Logan dropped to his knees and threw his arms around him. "Good boy, you did it. You really did it." Asher panted hard, but remained standing. He looked back at the glowing blaze behind him, then slowly sat down, blinking as if to say, "It's over. We're safe." Morning crept in as the fire crew arrived. Logan said very little. He just stood there, his hand resting on Asher's head, eyes lost in the distance, fixed on the collapsed barn roof. Ava, the vet, showed up not long after. She gave Asher a quick checkup right there on the porch. The burns weren't deep, but the smell of smoke clung to his fur. Logan remained silent as Ava worked. When she stood up, her eyes were shining with something more than just concern. "He didn't just survive, Logan. He made a choice. And no one can force a dog into fire unless he truly wants to save someone." Logan looked at Asher, who was now lying quietly beside him. The deep brown eyes stared back, calm and steady. There was no panic, no fear, no trace of the storm. Only the quiet stillness of a soul that had made it through. That night, Logan repaired the back door, the one Asher had burst through from the fire. As he hammered in the last board, he paused, staring into the dark yard beyond. Asher was sitting on the porch, watching silently. Logan turned, walked back to the front, and opened the main door. Not for air, for meaning. "The door's open, Asher. If you want to go, I won't stop you, but if you choose to stay, this is home." Asher stood, stepped inside slowly. No running, no hesitation. He walked straight to the rug by the fireplace and lay down. He didn't look back. Logan smiled softly. "So that's your answer." Asher rested his head on Logan's leg and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside the cabin, the firelight cast a quiet glow over 2 figures, a former soldier and a dog who had learned to stay. Evening drifted by in rare silence. After dinner, Logan carefully cleaned up the backyard while Asher lay by the steps, eyes half closed, tail gently flicking in rhythm with the breeze. No words were spoken, but both knew how fragile peace could be after storms and memories that refused to sleep. The sky had just begun to turn amber when a sharp popping sound broke the quiet, dry and sudden, from behind the trees near the old horse stable. Logan straightened immediately. Asher sprang up, ears pointed, gaze locked toward the source of the sound. Smoke. A thin gray trail rising from the stable roof. Logan dropped the rake and sprinted without a second thought. Asher raced beside him, no command needed. They moved like comrades, trained by battle, responding to a call only they could hear. Flames had caught in the corner of the barn, right where Logan had piled old hay to clear later. Firelight flickered across cracked wood, licking upward with the wind's help. The beams began to creak under pressure. Logan grabbed the hose, hands trembling not with fear but fury. There was a half-burned rag and an empty gasoline bottle near the back beam. This was no accident. "Asher, get back!" But Asher didn't move. He let out a low growl and darted around the barn toward the back door, the one Logan had sealed with a wooden latch. He barked once, sharp, then charged inside. "No, Asher!" Logan shouted, his chest tightening. The right side of the roof was starting to cave. Logan ran to the front just as the door burst open, and Asher emerged from the smoke, dragging a piece of cloth tied around his neck. Attached to it were two tiny, ash-covered puppies, barely moving, but alive. Asher stepped out like a warrior rising from ruin. Logan dropped to his knees and gathered all three into his arms. The puppies wheezed, soot coating their small bodies, but they were breathing. Asher, covered in ash, his fur singed and shoulder scraped, was still standing. Ava arrived 10 minutes after Logan's call. She quickly treated the burns on Asher's leg and bandaged his shoulder, then glanced at Logan, who sat close by with his hand resting on Asher's head. "He saved more lives again," Ava said quietly. "No," Logan replied, eyes steady. "He chose to. No command, no orders. He chose to go back into the fire. He chose to stay." Night fell faster than usual. The wind stirred outside, carrying the burnt scent across the land. Logan and Ava gathered what was left of the hay and propped up parts of the stable wall to prevent the fire from spreading into the woods. When they returned to the cabin, Asher was on the rug, the two pups curled up beside him as if that was the most natural thing in the world. Logan walked over, sat beside them, and met Asher's gaze. The front door was still open. Logan didn't close it. He sat there, staring into the dark, and whispered, "You can leave if you want, but if you stay, then this is your home. And today you proved it. You didn't ask. You didn't wait for permission. You belong here." Asher didn't reply, but he stood up, walked to the door where the night still lingered, and paused. Then he turned back. No tail wag, no hesitation. Just one long look at Logan before returning to the pups and curling up beside them. Logan smiled. He walked to the door and quietly closed it. Not to keep anyone out, but to keep something in, something he hadn't dared believe could return. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, casting a golden warmth over three shapes curled up on the old rug by the fire. One forgotten warrior, and two new lives rescued from the edge. Logan looked at the scene before him as if standing in front of a painting. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Something ordinary, yet quiet enough to let the heart rest. In that silence, he heard the sound of a door opening. It was his own hand on the handle, opening the same door he had closed the night before. Not to walk away, but to move forward. With Asher. The sun climbed higher over the roof of the old wooden house, casting soft light across the porch where three figures were curled up Asher, and the two little puppies he had pulled from the fire. Logan stood in the doorway, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, his eyes softened by a scene he never would have imagined seeing just a month ago. Asher stretched his legs and let out a quiet yawn. The two pups scrambled up, tails wagging all over the place. Logan chuckled under his breath. "You look like a grumpy old brother stuck with two clingy little kids, buddy." Asher tilted his head at him, then bent down, and gave one of the puppies a gentle lick on the head like he was saying, "It's okay. Let them hang around." The peaceful air of the morning was suddenly stirred by the sound of a car engine. A silver SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the farm. Asher stood immediately, alert but quiet. Logan set down his cup and walked out to the gate, giving a small wave. The woman who stepped out was Sarah Ward, the wife of the late Lieutenant Michael Baker. Her face looked thinner than the last time Logan had seen her in an old photo, but her eyes still held that steady determination he remembered from their training days. Sarah didn't speak at first. She slowly walked up to Logan, then glanced toward Asher. When their eyes met, Logan just nodded slightly and gestured toward the dog. "That's him." Asher stayed still. He didn't move forward. But the way he looked at her wasn't fearful. It was something else, a vague recognition, like some part of him sensed that this woman was tied to a memory that hadn't quite taken shape. Sarah took a deep breath, then lowered herself down to sit at eye level with Asher. She didn't reach out. She just sat there, calm and steady. I used to think I'd never get a piece of Michael back, but then Logan sent me the voice recordings, the files, and that photo of you from the day they rescued you at the auction. Asher didn't move. His ears twitched. His eyes never left her face. "Michael mentioned you in his last letter," she went on, her voice soft like morning mist. "He said that if anything ever happened to him, you, that skinny, stubborn, difficult dog, were the one thing he trusted most." There was a small shift in Asher, one step forward, then another. He stopped in front of her and lowered his head. Not because he was submitting, but because he remembered. Not fully. Not with words, but deep down, in the heart that had never forgotten. Sarah reached out this time, slower and softer. She touched his head. Asher didn't move away. He let her. Logan stood back by the fence, one hand resting on the wood. His chest felt warm in a way he couldn't explain. He didn't need to say anything. That moment, the quiet reunion between a fallen soldier and the companion who once stood beside him, said it all. Lunch that day was simple: cold sandwiches, lemonade, and silence. But no one seemed to need anything more. Sarah barely ate. Most of the time she just watched. Logan shared a few stories: how Asher had first stood on the porch, how he had carried the two puppies from the fire. "He didn't just survive," Logan said softly. "He chose to live. Nobody made him. And I think he's teaching me how to do the same." Sarah smiled, not because it made her happy, but like someone hearing something true and painful all at once. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the table. "This is Michael's journal. The last part talks about the training program. The things he started noticing weren't right. I think... Logan, it's time to bring the truth out." Logan held the envelope firmly. Asher walked over and sat beside him. No one asked him to. It was just the right moment. "He's going to have to face what once broke his spirit," Sarah said, looking at Asher. "But this time he won't be facing it alone." Logan nodded. He understood. And so did Asher. The front door opened, not because of the wind, but because it was time to step through it. The morning mist hadn't fully lifted when the phone rang inside the small wooden house. Logan picked it up the way he always did, calmly, with no expectations. But the voice on the other end made him freeze. "This is the K-9 Assessment and Response Center, Under Command Division. Is this Mr. Logan Hale?" "Yes. We need to speak with you about a military dog named Rex, also known as Asher." Logan sat up straight. Asher, sensing something, got up and walked over to him, eyes focused like he was waiting for whatever came next. "We've reviewed the documents forwarded by Mrs. Sarah Ward, including Lieutenant Baker's journal and the recently recovered footage. The situation is more serious than we expected." Logan kept his voice steady. "What do you mean?" We need you and Asher to come into the evaluation center to clarify his current condition and gather some additional statements. If everything checks out like the documents say, this could be the key to reopening the investigation into the training program that was shut down 3 years ago. Logan stayed quiet for a few seconds, then gave a firm nod. We'll be there. On the drive to the center, the silence in the car wasn't heavy. It was calm. Asher sat in the back seat, resting his head on the armrest, eyes quietly watching the world outside the window. Logan kept both hands on the wheel, his grip tighter than usual. This time, you're not just here for yourself, old friend, he said gently. You're standing for every other warrior who got silenced, just like you. Asher blinked slowly, like he understood that perfectly. The center was tucked away in a quiet stretch of forest, its gate tall and lined with security cameras. The staff weren't in uniform, but from their posture and sharp glances, it was clear this wasn't just another evaluation. The person in charge, a woman named Rachel, brought them into a private room. It had cameras, but the atmosphere wasn't tense or cold. Rachel sat across from Logan and placed a folder in front of him. We'd like to run a field test. It's not mandatory, but if Asher passes, we'll have enough to consider him operational again. That would be a necessary step to legally challenge the dismissal decision. Logan glanced at Asher, who was lying calmly by his feet. He doesn't have anything to prove. Rachel nodded gently. I understand, but the system still demands it, and if we want to change it, we have to go through it first. The test was held in the rear yard of the center, a mock battlefield, with smoke, recorded explosions, and moving dummies. Asher was assigned 3 scenarios: locating an injured person, warning of a potential threat, and reacting to sudden loud noise. Logan stood off to the side, watching. His chest felt tight, pulled between not wanting Asher to struggle and silently wishing things would go smoothly, just to make the road ahead a little easier. A loud whistle cut through the air. Asher didn't dash off like he might have in the past. He walked slowly, ears alert, eyes scanning everything. When a fake explosion went off to the left, he froze. His legs trembled just slightly. Logan's hand clenched into a fist. But then Asher took a deep breath. He turned toward the smoke where the injured dummy was placed and kept moving. One step at a time. When he reached the target, Asher didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply sat beside the dummy and looked up, waiting for further instruction. Rachel quietly looked away from the monitor for a moment. The test continued with a threat assessment drill. When a hostile dummy appeared, Asher moved to place himself between it and the victim. His body lowered, a clear growl rumbled from him, but he didn't attack. He followed the protocol. And beyond that, he acted from instinct and heart. Logan couldn't take his eyes off him. He knew this wasn't about skill anymore. It was about the journey Asher had chosen, the one where he fought to reclaim what had been stolen from him. His honor. At the end of the session, Rachel invited Logan back to the meeting room. Asher was resting outside, being cared for by a specialist. Rachel placed a preliminary report on the table. I'll be honest with you, she said. I've never seen a K9 bounce back like this after being dismissed for being uncontrollable. But more than that, there's something else that makes me believe in him. Logan looked up. What is it? The way he looks at you. Logan raised an eyebrow. Most working dogs respond purely out of training, but he acts for you. He chooses to do the job, not out of fear of punishment, out of trust. And that we can't teach. She paused for a moment, then added more seriously. We're going to recommend reopening the case. And Asher, if you agree, would be nominated for the military K9 honor program. He'd be a living symbol of reform. Logan glanced out the window, where Asher was sitting by the fence, watching quietly in his direction. Logan nodded slowly. He's not doing this alone, and this time, no one is leaving him behind. The next morning, rain misted over the windshield as Logan and Asher returned to the center. The air was cold, but not biting. Just enough to make each breath feel heavier, more real, like the weight of a day they both knew would not be easy. Rachel met them at the gate. Her expression was softer than yesterday, but her tone was even more serious. "We'd like to conduct a special test," she said. "Not to measure performance, but emotional response. If Asher really is the key to this investigation, he needs to remember. And he needs to choose how to respond to what he remembers." Logan nodded, gently placing a hand on Asher's back, as if to reassure him. Asher didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He kept his eyes straight ahead, as if he was ready. The center had recreated an old-style training camp, a scaled-down replica of the facility where Rex had once been sent. From hidden speakers around the yard, simulation sounds began playing. The sharp bark of trainers, alarms, the metallic clatter of chains dragged across concrete. Logan was asked to stay outside the training area. Asher would go in alone. No leash, no commands, no treats, just memory and choice. "Are you sure about this?" Rachel asked one last time. "No," Logan said, eyes locked on Asher. "But he looks like he is." The gate opened. Asher stepped in, slow but steady. The first sound to echo was the clinking of steel chains on concrete. Asher froze, his whole body tensed up like a bowstring, ears forward, eyes wide. Then came the sharp, cold commands, "Sit! Down! Stay!" He trembled for just a second. Logan, standing behind the fence, clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. But he didn't go in. This wasn't his fight to fight. A trainer dummy stepped out from the shadows, wearing the old uniform and holding a fake shock baton. It didn't come close. It just paced, repeating the same movements Asher had endured during the last 6 months at the camp. Asher stepped back. A low growl rumbled in his throat. He didn't bark, he didn't attack, but he didn't back down either. Logan saw it clearly caught between fear and instinct. Asher was fighting for control. And then he sat. Not because he was ordered to, but because he chose not to run. Rachel reached for the microphone, ready to call off the test, when one last sound came through the system. A voice clip pulled from the archives of a soldier's voice shouting, believed to be Lieutenant Baker during a session with Rex. "Rex, get back! Don't take that path! Rex!" Asher shot up. His ears perked, his eyes widened. He ran, not in panic, not in chaos, but with a sudden sense of purpose, like he had just found something he lost long ago. He ran straight to the corner of the yard, where the voice had come from, and stopped, breathing hard, staring at the wall. Logan couldn't stay back any longer. "Asher!" Asher turned. Their eyes met, but this time nothing shattered. There was only one thing in that gaze now. He remembered. And he was still here. Logan dropped to his knees. Asher ran to him and pressed his head into Logan's shoulder, like someone who had traveled far just to find his way home again. Rachel stood in silence, then slowly took off her headset. She walked over and looked at them for a long moment. He didn't just pass the test. He confirmed a buried memory and his reaction. That wasn't instinct. That was my choice. Logan placed a hand gently on Asher's head. He didn't choose to forget. He chose to face it. That afternoon, Logan was invited to a closed-door meeting at the center. They delivered the official decision. Asher's discharge from the force would be suspended. An independent commission would now review the entire training program, pulling all historical data and taking testimony from anyone connected to Major Krause's unit. Asher now officially reinstated, as Rex would serve as the first witness. He couldn't speak, but his actions would say more than words ever could. Logan looked down at the freshly printed file with Rex's name bold at the top. He reached out and gently ran his fingers across it, then nodded. That night, when they got back to the farm, the rain still hadn't let up. But it didn't matter. Asher walked through the door first. Confidence. No hesitation. He didn't wait for permission. Logan followed, took off his coat, tossed it on the hook, and lit the fireplace. They didn't need to say anything. Everything followed its rhythm. The water bowl, the warm dinner, the old rug in front of the fire. Asher curled up and rested his head on Logan's leg. Then he looked up at him. In those eyes, Logan no longer saw a dog flinching at every sound. He saw a warrior, one who had finally made it home. The city was quiet on that chilly Monday morning. The National Military K-9 Investigation Committee headquarters rose among the concrete buildings like a block of frozen memory, colorless, emotionless. But something felt different today. A German shepherd named Asher, once dismissed as unfit for service, now stood at its gate. Beside him was Logan Hale, a soldier who carried wounds not just on his body, but deep in his heart. They hadn't come to prove anything. They came to remind me, to speak for the forgotten and shine light on what had been buried. The hearing was held in a large assembly hall, attended by military officials, Department of Justice representatives, military veterinary experts, and two very specific witnesses, Logan Hale and Rex Asher's official name in the records. Logan was asked to speak first. His voice wasn't loud or rushed, but clear. He told the story from the beginning, the auction, that first look, and the long road that brought Asher back to being who he truly was. A warrior. He didn't need retraining, Logan said, eyes fixed on the rows of officials above. He just needed to be treated right like a teammate, not a tool. Video footage followed. Asher acing the reaction tests, navigating simulations, and most striking of all, stopping in his tracks at the sound of a familiar voice, a recording of the late Lieutenant Baker, not reacting out of command, but from instinct and memory. The room quieted noticeably as a video played showing Asher blocking the entrance to a burning building and leading two puppies out of the flames. From the back row, a young officer whispered, "No amount of training teaches that." Next up, Ava the vet presented Asher's medical file, pointing to old scars that didn't match any standard training patterns. She spoke plainly. These are signs of forced conditioning methods, ones that were banned in 2017, and Rex is a textbook case of the damage that system caused. Then Sarah Ward took the floor. She carried the last journal of her late husband, Lieutenant Baker. In it, he had written about inhumane testing and listed the names of canines who were discharged after showing signs of non-compliance. Rex's name was circled in red. Michael wrote, "If I don't make it, find that dog. He doesn't need revenge. He just needs someone to believe he wasn't wrong." Her voice dropped as she read that final line. The hearing reached its peak when Colonel Pearson, the man who had signed the discharge order for Asher, stepped forward. He looked tense. His eyes met Asher's for just a second, then moved on. "I followed protocol at the time," he said. "Based on the reports I received, Rex was a liability, but after everything I've seen today, I have to admit I was wrong." The room fell silent. Logan tightened his grip on the leash, but said nothing. Asher sat beside him, tall and steady, not trembling. "I wasn't just wrong about Rex," Colonel Pearson continued. "I was wrong about every dog who got discarded just for not fitting a mold." After 2.5 hours, the chairperson stood and read the temporary decision. Asher's discharge record would be revoked. An independent investigation would reopen into the enhanced K-9 training program once overseen by Major Krause. Most importantly, Asher would be recognized as a symbol of recovery, reform, and unconditional loyalty. Logan finally let out a breath. It wasn't a relief from winning. It was the weight lifting, even just a little, from both of them. Rachel, head of the evaluation center, approached him after the hearing and handed him a small wooden box. The military doesn't usually give medals to dogs. But today, they made an exception. Inside the box was a small wooden plaque. The engraving read, "Rex, Companion, Rescuer, Survivor." Logan bent down to show Asher. He couldn't read the words, but the look he gave Logan, followed by a gentle wave of his tail, said everything. That afternoon, when they returned to the farm, the sun had finally come out. Logan parked by the fence and opened the back door. "Asher, let's go." Asher stepped down and took a deep breath. The familiar land stretched out before him like a welcome. Logan walked beside him up the porch steps. The front door was just as it always had been, unlocked. But this time they weren't stepping in as just residents. They were survivors. And they had won. Logan placed the plaque on the old wooden table. In the late afternoon light, the gold lettering glowed softly. Asher curled up beneath the table, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Justice couldn't erase the past, but it opened a door to the future. And today, that future had begun. Spring arrived early in the Montana hills. The sky was painted in a soft blue, sunlight warming the dew-covered grass. The old wooden house still stood quietly by the pines, but now it was surrounded by new sounds. Tools clanking, voices talking, laughter, barking. Logan stood near a leveled patch of land, hands on his hips, watching a crew of veterans install the first steel frame for a new recovery kennel. Asher lay by his feet, half asleep in the sun, his head resting on the leg of a young girl, the daughter of one of the volunteers. "I still can't believe we pulled this off," Ava said, waking up beside Logan, her white coat covered in sawdust. "From the ashes of an old horse barn to the foundation for the first recovery center for discharged K-9s. Logan nodded. "He did it. I just followed his lead." Asher opened one eye and twitched an ear. He didn't need to understand the words. He just knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The project was called Second Chance K-9 Sanctuary, and it had taken shape right after the hearing. Part of the funding came from the Department of Defense, a form of amends. The rest came from nonprofits, veterans, and everyday people who had followed Asher's journey in the media. "We're not building a training facility," Logan had said in the very first meeting. "We're building a place where dogs can just be themselves, a place to heal, not be fixed." The center had 3 main zones: medical recovery, behavioral interaction, and most importantly, the community living area, where human veterans and their canine partners could recover together, free from fences and isolation. Asher was the first resident, and the living proof it could work. He didn't just lie by the porch anymore. He went on walks with new arrivals, played with the puppies, and sometimes, without being asked, curled up beside the newest veterans with PTSD as someone who had walked through the fire and made it back. One afternoon, while setting up the behavior monitoring system, a new volunteer asked Logan, "Why don't you let Asher fully retire? He's done enough." Logan smiled, watching Asher lying next to a one-eared Labrador. "Because what he's doing now is how he heals. Same goes for me." At night, the center never went completely dark. Warm yellow lights spilled from the main building. Logan and Ava often sat on the porch, reviewing files for incoming dogs. Sarah, now handling communications and intake, sent weekly reports, usually with handwritten notes. "He inspires," she once wrote. "Asher isn't just a survivor. He's the reason people believe they can get back up too." One Monday morning, a gray pickup pulled up to the gate. A young soldier stepped out, holding the leash of a thin, hollow-eyed Malinois. His name's Shadow, the soldier said. They were going to put him down. I couldn't let that happen. Logan didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and looked toward Asher. Asher walked forward, calm and steady. Shadow growled, but Asher didn't flinch. He sat down 1 meter away and looked directly into Shadow's eyes the same way he once looked into his own reflection, years ago. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Shadow stopped growling. He stepped back, then forward again. Asher still didn't move. I think we're going to be okay, Logan said. The sanctuary slowly became more than just a rescue center. It became a place for rebirth. Some veterans began returning more often, at first just to visit, then to stay. They helped build shelters, taught basic training, showed the dogs how to walk on a leash, and relearned how to breathe peacefully in broad daylight. One star-filled night, Ava placed a hand on Logan's shoulder. You realize something, she said. We're not talking about recovery anymore. We're talking about living. Logan didn't answer. He just leaned down and gently stroked Asher's head, who had his chin resting on Logan's knee, like he did every night. On the day that marked the center's 3rd month in operation, a package arrived. Inside was a letter and a small wooden plaque. The engraving read, "The Second Friend of Warriors." No name, no return address. But Logan knew exactly who it was from. A silent thank you from those who had seen Asher in the past and who now believed in him in the present. Logan mounted the plaque on the main gate. Under the late afternoon sun, the words stood out clearly. And right beside it, Asher lay there with eyes half closed, ears alert. Still listening. Still watching over those who came after him, the way an older brother quietly stays behind. On a late autumn morning, mist curled along the trails that wove through the sanctuary. The wooden gate that read, Second Chance K9 Sanctuary creaked lightly in the breeze. Behind it, life moved gently, just as it always had. Asher walked slowly beside Logan, his pace a little slower now, but still proud and steady. At almost 12 years old, a seasoned age for a German shepherd, he kept to his usual rhythm. A morning patrol around the sanctuary, sitting quietly near the training field as the new recruits began their drills. He wasn't leading anymore. He had become something else, a living symbol, a silent elder. That morning, Logan received a letter from the Department of Defense. Inside the thick envelope was an official proposal to form a National Advisory Council, with Asher as the first K9 ever reinstated after discharge, serving as the honorary emblem of the country's K9 reform program. Logan read the letter, then looked toward the porch, where Asher was lying at the top of the steps, eyes closed. He sat beside him and gently placed a hand on his head. They want to name the new program after you, Project Asher. What do you think? Asher opened his eyes, but didn't react much. He lifted his head and rested his forehead on Logan's knee. It was an old gesture, one that had first happened in that dusty auction barn years ago. Logan smiled softly. Okay, I'll take that as a yes. That night, Ava, Sarah, and a few close veterans gathered around the fire. They didn't talk much about war anymore, or loss. Instead, they shared stories about the new dogs arriving, the odd behavior of a restless young husky, and how just having Asher nearby seemed to settle the younger K9s almost instantly. He gives off something we can't see, Ava said. It's like the moment he shows up, the chaos just softens. Sarah nodded, hand resting on her knee, eyes on Asher curled up beside Logan. Maybe it's the language of survivors, she said. They don't need to speak. They just need to be there. The following month, the center welcomed 5 more veterans and 6 injured dogs. One was missing a leg. One was nearly blind. Under the guidance of the volunteers and Asher, the group began to settle in. Dogs that once seemed to have lost all trust in people slowly started walking side by side again, wagging their tails when they heard their names. One day, while Logan was inspecting the back fence, Ava came running. "Asher's down. He's not getting up." Logan's heart stuttered. He rushed back to the porch where Asher lay curled, eyes open but dull. Ava checked his heart rate, his temperature, then whispered gently, "He's not in pain. He's just tired. The cold, the age, and maybe he knows." Logan sat down and wrapped his arms around him. Asher wasn't gasping, wasn't afraid. He just lay still, head resting on Logan's hand, like always. The entire sanctuary seemed to pause that afternoon. People walked slower. Voices grew softer. It was like the whole place was breathing with Asher. That night, Logan didn't sleep. He lay on the floor beside him, covering Asher with a light blanket. No promises, no goodbyes, just presence. Just being there, like always. The next morning, Asher opened his eyes. Logan blinked down at him. "Good morning." Asher stretched, slowly got to his feet, took a few short laps, then lay back down. Everyone at the center let out a silent sigh of relief. Nobody said much, but their eyes met across the courtyard in quiet gratitude. A month later, Logan wrote a letter to the Department of Defense, turning down the advisory council role. "I don't believe Asher's legacy belongs on a document or locked in policy," he wrote. "His legacy lives in the eyes of the dogs he helped stand again. It lives in the hands of the veterans who've learned to trust kindness again. And it lives here in this place where every breath is a thank you." 1 year after the center opened, an international delegation visited with a proposal to expand the model globally. They asked Logan if he was willing to share the framework, to replicate the project around the world. Logan didn't answer right away. He just pointed toward the far end of the field, where Asher was lying beside a newly arrived dog, eyes soft, tail gently brushing the ground in comfort. "He's your answer," Logan said. "If you can replicate that, not the structure, but the heart, then the sanctuary can be anywhere." That winter, Asher passed. Quietly, in his sleep, on a cold night. No one knew exactly when. Just that, come morning. The sun rose a little slower, and every sound seemed a little softer than usual. Logan held him, saying nothing. He just placed a hand on Asher's back, like he had done 100 times before. A small stone marker was placed beneath the old maple tree in front of the house. It read, "Asher, the one who never left anyone behind." Beneath the inscription was a smaller line, carved softly into the stone. "Legacy is not what we leave behind, but the hearts we touch along the way." The sanctuary kept going. The dogs still came and healed. The veterans still returned and slowly learned to love again. But one thing never changed. Every morning, before the day began, everyone stopped for one quiet moment in front of Asher's marker. And then they started the day in the exact way he had taught them, with a quiet presence and the courage to keep walking forward. The first light of day filtered through the trees, laying a soft, misty glow over the old wooden roof of the Second Chance K9 sanctuary. It looked like hope had just found a way to rise. But today, the yard was quieter than usual. Asher was lying in the treatment room. His body had grown noticeably thinner after weeks of exhaustion. He slept more, ate less, and only opened his eyes when Logan called his name. The very people who had once survived because of Asher's presence now sat silently nearby, waiting for a miracle no one dared to speak out loud. Logan stayed by Asher's side almost the entire day. He didn't bring any paperwork, didn't check on the kennels. He just sat there, one hand resting on the thick neck that used to be so strong, his eyes locked on the rise and fall of his friend's fragile breath. "You know," Logan said softly, as if they were just talking on a regular night. "People always say symbols are unreachable. But to me, you're the only symbol I've ever held in my arms." Asher didn't move, but his ears twitched ever so slightly, just enough for Logan to smile. When news of Asher's condition started to spread, the small, sleepy town stirred. Storefronts hung signs that read, "Praying for Asher." The elementary school held an art day where kids painted pictures titled, "Our Brave Friend." A veteran named Cole, who once found his way back from the edge thanks to Asher's gaze, biked over 30 miles just to lay a single maple branch at the sanctuary gate. "He never spoke, but he walked into my dream when I thought nobody needed me anymore," Cole said, his voice rough. "Now it's our turn to stay because he needs us." Ava, no stranger to life and death, still had to steel herself every time she entered the treatment room. She often paused at the doorway, took a deep breath, then walked in, laying a gentle hand on Asher's back, checking each reflex like she was tuning into her own heartbeat. "I don't know if he'll make it through," she told Logan one late night. "But what I do know is he's never really left. He's still here, still holding us together." One afternoon, when the sunlight turned the front yard golden, Sarah arrived unexpectedly, bringing a group of children. Each of them carried a drawing, a little story, or a message of hope. "They want to read to Asher," she said. "They think maybe he can hear them." Logan led them into the room. The kids sat in a circle, their voices soft and careful. "I dreamed you protected the whole school when it rained really hard. I hope I get to visit you someday. Thank you for teaching us that nobody is ever useless." Asher stayed still. But when little Emma, the first child who ever touched him during last year's fundraiser, stepped close and whispered, "You can't give up, okay?" his tail gave a tiny flick. No one said a word, but everyone saw it. That night, Logan stood on the porch, looking out at stars hanging above the dark treetops. Ava sat beside him, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "This town was torn up by war," she said. "Then it got forgotten. But one dog stepped out of the dark and reminded everyone we still have hearts." "And now the whole town is trying to keep that heartbeat alive," Logan replied quietly. Ava nodded. "You think Asher can hear all of this?" Logan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the treatment room window, where Asher lay motionless on the old pad. "He's always listening, even when no one's speaking." The next morning, when Logan entered the room like he had every other day, he froze at the doorway. Asher was still lying there, but his eyes were wide open, and more than that, his head was lifted, not leaning on anything at all. Logan stared in disbelief for a second, then stepped closer. He knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. "Good morning." Asher licked his lips, then tilted his head slightly. His gaze was still cloudy, but clearer than it had been in days. Outside, sunlight spilled across every blade of grass. The town hadn't heard yet, but someone at the sanctuary had already run out into the yard, shouting, "He's awake! Asher's awake!" A little bell rang out from the old wooden church at the foot of the hill, and that morning, people believed once more that maybe, just maybe, miracles could begin with a single glance. On the hillside, where the sun always touched first each morning, new kennels were slowly taking shape. Fresh-cut pine filled the air with a clean, sharp scent. The white fences stood tall and neat, like blank pages waiting to be written on. And the Second Chance K9 sanctuary flag fluttered gently in the breeze, like a silent welcome to anyone looking for a place to begin again. After the Asher Protocol was passed, the Department of Defense officially selected the Montana Sanctuary model as the national blueprint. But Logan didn't feel like he'd been chosen. He just believed this place was right. And more than anything, Asher had always been right. They never called Asher a mascot. That felt too decorative. They called him a guide, which felt far more fitting for the role he had always played, even long before any medals or protocols made it official. Whenever a new veteran and K9 pair arrived, Logan never stepped in first. He let Asher do that. With just a look, a gentle lick, or simply the quietness of being there, Asher always had a way of calming those weary eyes. "No one taught Asher to do that," Ava once said, "but he knows because he once stepped out of the darkest place himself." Second Chance K9 wasn't just a makeshift farm anymore. It was now a fully licensed, nationally recognized recovery center for working dogs and veterans. Beyond healing, the center also trained psychological volunteers, hosted emotional awareness courses for young officers, and taught the art of healing through partnership. Logan didn't run things from behind a desk. He still wore the same worn-out shirts, walked the fence lines each day, helped rotate cooking shifts, and never missed a single checkup for any of the incoming dogs. As for Asher, he was still Asher, just slower now. His ears didn't perk as sharply as before, and every afternoon, like clockwork, he would lie at the main house steps, watching over the sanctuary like a quiet sentinel. But no one, not even Logan, dared to call him old. Because whenever something stirred or tension rose, he was always the first to bark. And those eyes, the ones that could stop someone in their tracks, had never lost their light. One late afternoon, while Logan was reviewing intake notes for a new dog coming in from New York, a young volunteer walked over, hesitating a little. "Hey, Logan, a few of us were thinking. We want to hold a little ceremony, not for the center, for Asher." Logan looked up, a little caught off guard. "Like a birthday?" "Not exactly. More like the day he officially became a guide. The day Second Chance became a national center. That was the day everything started." Logan paused for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "All right. Just an evening of thank you party." The thank you gathering took place right on the first day of spring. More than 200 people showed up, not counting the dogs wandering around the yard, each wearing a bandana that read, "I came back to life." There was no stage, just one big circle in the grass. People took turns sharing the little things Asher had done for them. A soldier who had once planned to end his life but changed his mind after Asher lay quietly by his bed for 3 hours. A little girl with anxiety who smiled for the first time when Asher lifted his paw so she could place a pillow underneath. When it was Logan's turn, he didn't stand. He just sat next to Asher and rested a hand on his back. "You didn't save the world," he said softly. "You just stayed, and that alone saved all of us." As the sun dipped behind the tree line, a young boy, the son of one of the officers, shyly walked over and handed Logan a piece of paper. "I drew Asher," he said, "but not when he was young. I drew him now, because now is when he's the most real." Logan looked at the sketch. Simple pencil lines, but the eyes were unmistakable. Eyes that had seen war, loss, healing, and were still guiding the way forward. On the last afternoon before spring fully gave way to summer, Logan paused in front of the old wooden gate of Second Chance K9. The wind was light, the white flag fluttered gently, and the wooden sign bearing Asher's name stood quietly in the sun. The gate was open. It was never locked, not in any season, like a quiet promise to anyone who needed a place to start over. Logan turned and looked up the hill, the same hill where Asher used to lie and watch over every sunset. Though he was no longer there in body, his breath, his gaze, his footsteps were everywhere. Logan gave a slight nod, like saying hello, then walked through the gate not locked and never needed to be. Because once trust is given, those who survive will always find their way home. Asher's story isn't just about a dog. It's about what happens when someone is broken, betrayed, or blamed for something they didn't deserve. but still chooses to stand up and fight. Logan took in a wounded soul, not knowing he was also rescuing his own. Together they proved that loyalty, even if lost, can be found again, and even the most shattered bonds can be rebuilt with patience, truth, and love. And if you're watching this because you've been hurt by betrayal, by suspicion, or by being wrongly accused with no evidence, know this. You are not alone. Don't let the shadows of others define your worth. Stay calm. Document the truth. Protect your peace. And if there are children involved, protect their emotional safety too. Reach out to someone you trust, whether it's a lawyer, a therapist, or just a friend who listens without judgment. You are not weak because you feel pain. You are strong because you're still standing in the middle of a storm. And now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been wrongly accused? Ever doubted someone you love without proof? Or maybe you were the one who had to rebuild after everything fell apart. Share your story in the comments below, not just for yourself, but for someone out there curled up in despair, searching for one flicker of hope the same way you once did. This space is yours. And who knows? Your story might be the reason someone else finds the courage to step out of the fire for the first time. So if it were you, what would you say to someone who's hurting and doesn't know where to begin?